As you all know, Canada is blessed with vast reserves of oil, but we have a problem. 97% of that oil is sold to one customer, the United States, and we're seeing declining demand and lower prices from that one customer. Salameh believes that the answer to this problem is expanding access for Canadian oil products to new markets such as Asia. He will tell us about how he plans to help to solve this problem through Pacific Future Energy. Pacific Future Energy intends to build a near net zero carbon emissions refinery on the coast in British Columbia. Samer is the executive chair of Pacific Future Energy. In addition, he leads the telecom practice and new business development at Grupo Salinas, a large industrial conglomerate operating in 11 countries in the Americas. He managed the development and deployment of complex infrastructure projects for some of the world's leading investors, including Carlos Slim and Ricardo Salinas. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Samer Salameh. Samer will be pleased to answer your questions following his remarks.
Thank you, Andrea. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. The first question that people ask me when we start talking about this project of ours is, why are you involved? Why am I personally involved in this thing? So what is a Catholic Lebanese guy who grew up in Paris, who spent the last 30 years as an American citizen in the US and Latin America, working and making billions of dollars for people like Carlos Slim and Ricardo Salinas, who, as you probably know, don't need additional billions, but yet I help them make a few. What am I doing here, and why am I involved in this project, and how did it come to be? So a small anecdote before I get into the presentation. So this journey that ended here, this is a step on the way, started about 31 years ago when I first came from Paris to the US. The flight, I had $200 and a one-way ticket. This is how I arrived to New York. That was in March 1984. And the plane I took from Paris couldn't make it all the way through. It was a charter flight. So actually it landed in Gander here in Canada to refuel and then continue. So in the refueling stop, I got off the plane and I saw ice cream, which is something I had never had before. I was 19 years old. So I spent $3 on my first ice cream. And so when I arrived to New York, I had $197. And in retrospect, I think I should have stayed in Gander and stayed in Canada instead of taking this entire journey through New York, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, back to New York, and now back to Canada. I should have just stayed in Gander and stayed in Canada. But hey, I'm here today. And how did this project come to be, actually? So about 14 years ago, this young lawyer who I've been trying to take the law out of his mind for the last 14 years, Bob Delamar, who is my partner in this venture. We started working together at a company in Silicon Valley. I was the CEO of the company. He was one of the young people there. And we've been friends for the last 14 years. And for that entire time, he's been trying to convince me to come and do something in Canada. And about 18 months ago, we were in Whistler skiing. And of course, he picked the perfect day, not like today, beautiful weather, sunny, and he actually told me it's every day like that. Not sure that's quite true. As I got off the plane this morning, minus 12 degrees wasn't exactly what I had in mind. But we started talking about doing something in Canada, because I had come to the conclusion that this is really where I wanted to spend, now that I just turned 50. And this is the place I want to spend the rest of my life, is in Canada. And there's a long story why that's the case, but actually today was very funny for me, interesting when you guys raised the glass to the Queen. That's the first time I did that, and hopefully not the last time, as I'm applying for Canadian citizenship. But the project came to be because we were sitting on the slopes talking to a lot of people from BC about the problem that Canada has. And the fact that very little is being done by private enterprise to solve the problem. And what is the problem? So I'll let the words of Finance Minister Joe Oliver summarize it. I'll read it, although I'm sure you can read on your own. It's a matter of urgent national interest. This is something he said last week in the press, that we move our oil to Tidewater because our only customer, the U.S., has found vast amount of shale oil and gas and will need us less and less. If we do not access new markets, our resources will be stranded and a huge opportunity would be lost. We decided to put these words up there because this is exactly what we were discussing 18 months ago. And I was frankly surprised as a non-Canadian, why is not everybody in this country trying to do something about this? You guys have seen what the impact of the drop of oil has done to the Alberta economy and to the general economy in the last few months just by a small drop in oil prices. Imagine if this is not a 1 year or a 6 month blip on the radar screen, but a continuous event. Imagine what the impact that has on the Canadian economy. This is exactly the problem we set out to solve a few months ago, 18 months ago. So we created this company. We put in our own money in it. It's been a very interesting process, and here we are today. But the issue here that Mr. Oliver is talking about is one of the issues. And actually his comment was that the supply of oil to the U.S. will decline. There was a counter-argument immediately that that's not true. It will actually stay stable. Whether it stays stable or decline, that's not the issue in my opinion, in our opinion. The issue here is somewhat different. The producers in Alberta are trying to actually double production from 2 million barrels a day in Alberta today to 4 million barrels. How do you actually get to 4 million from 2 when the consensus either is going to stay flat or decline? So that's the first problem. But far worse than that is the second problem. Today, why are we as Canadians, if I may put myself in the collective we, why are we as Canadians subsidizing the U.S.? Do you guys realize that in 2014 alone, $15.9 billion Canadian dollars went from Canada to subsidize U.S. refiners? This is actual numbers. This number at the current trend of exports by 2020 will be $24 billion. How do we get to that number? Very simple. That graph there is actually tracking a difference, historical difference to the last 5 years, between WTI prices, so Western Texas Intermediary, which is the main index in the U.S., and what Western WCS, so the Canadian price of oil is sold at. There's a $30 price difference between what Canada sells its oil on the international market, and international in this case means the U.S., because guess what? 97% of the oil produced from this country is going to one country, it's called the U.S. So international in this case is the U.S. So we have been selling at $30 below market prices, one of the biggest commodities in this country, to the U.S. refiners. And who's making the dollars? The U.S. So not surprising. This is just press releases from some of the producers, Phillips, Shell, Exxon. They've just announced, even with declining oil prices, some of the best quarterly results ever. And the reason, which is credited, is refining profits in the U.S. from Canadian oil. This is what's been going on. Today, I checked this morning, it might have changed by now, so don't quote me, but WTI prices this morning was $45. So if you buy it in the U.S. for $45, Canadian today price is about $36. It's trading about $12 to $13 less, even today. This is the problem. And this is a small summary of how that happens. You see that star there. This is Alberta production. All the pipelines are going to one destination, which is the U.S. refiners, where, again, 97% of the oil is going. And 1 to 3%, depending on the quarter, actually makes its way from the south, from Texas, to Europe, to Spain, where it's refined at a margin. This is how much money is left on the table here, okay? So we're actually able to take oil from Canada, take it through a pipeline, get it on trains, get it off of trains, into ships, ship it to Spain, refine it, and still make a profit. And it's only going to get worse because the U.S., as Mr. Oliver said, the U.S. shale production is only increasing. They're up to about 10 million barrels a day. Even with the declining oil prices right now, they're expected to be flat for a while, the production, and not increase as was expected. But it will pick up again later next year. So they're supposed to go to 12 to 13 million barrels a day. So as the U.S. is taking less and less importing oil, and the share of Canada's oil from that is hopefully staying flat, if not declining, then where do we go from here? How do we increase production and how to recapture which is the most important piece here, and that's been left to the dialogue. How do we recapture this $24 billion a year in money literally left on the table? How do we recapture that? Well, and last point, this is not going to go away. So this is a quote from Wood Mackenzie, where this price arbitrage has been at $30 for the last 5 years, is expected to remain roughly in the $18 to $25 per barrel for the foreseeable future. A big problem. I'm not Canadian yet, and I'm worried. You should be worried. So the last 6 years, we've seen this battle going on where Enbridge has tried to build a pipeline because the solution is very simple. There is a part of the world where the demand for oil is actually increasing. Europe demand for oil is reducing because of conservation measures they've taken, reliance on gas, etc. So the Europe is not the market. And when Libya comes back online, they're going to take less and less. So going east is not going to go anything. Going north, North Pole. Going south is the U.S. Where are you going to go? West. Guess what? From Prince Rupert, which is the end of that little red line there, actually that's Kitimat, so if you go straight up, it's Prince Rupert. It's 10 days to Tokyo. It's literally the closest point on the planet to Tokyo by ship is from Prince Rupert. To Shanghai, it's 13 days. Asia, this is where the growth is. There's a consensus on that. So let's step back here. Alberta has the second largest oil reserve in the world. Asia is the only market that's growing. How do we get from point A to point B? Okay, so the first effort to date has been, let's build a pipeline. The problem with the pipeline is the way it was done, first of all, that was done without proper consultation with First Nations. That's an issue. And second issue is the value proposition is we're going to take oil from Alberta, take it to the shore, ship it. So this is 220 VLCCs, 2 million barrels ships. Out of Kitimat, small, I've actually, first thing we did with Bob and I when we started getting into this thing, we rented a helicopter and we flew over it. It's a small channel. You're going to take 220 VLCCs through that, and then wait, you're going to take it through the Hecate Strait. So when you see the end of that, the red line there, that's the fourth most dangerous body of water on the face of the planet. We're going to take 220 VLCCs through that and ship it to Asia, where it's a matter, and if, God forbid, one of those ships goes down, that type of oil, there is arguments whether it floats or it sinks. Either way, it's really bad news. So when you go to the local communities and say, we're going to take this oil out of your waters and ship it to Asia, and you get no compensation for it to speak of. And if there is a catastrophe, you get to clean it up. It's a difficult value proposition to sell. I'm a good salesman. Even I couldn't sell that. So lo and behold, 6 years in the making, they're not going anywhere, and that pipeline is now stuck in the mud, pun intended. So, because again, they haven't managed to catch social license. So after the recent Williams decision by the Supreme Court, now First Nations actually have them blocked. And the key here is they don't have social license, they didn't have buy-in from the First Nations group. So if the pipeline is not the way to do it, so what do you do? So there is our solution. We set out to build the first NZNC. What does it stand for? Near Zero Gas Emission Refinery on the coast of BC. So the first question people asked us is why? So the obvious answer is, well, it is sitting first of all on a train line. So whether a pipeline is built or not, we don't need a pipeline, we can feed it by train. It's not ideal, we prefer a pipeline as long as that pipeline goes right into our refinery. Okay, so if the pipeline is ever built, in fact, this helps the pipeline discussion. Because if we're able to get a refinery built, then it becomes more palatable to have the pipeline built into the refinery. And now you're shipping not crude, and certainly not the type of crude coming out of Alberta, but you're shipping a refined product, gasoline, diesel, etc. God forbid, should anything happen to that, within a few weeks that actually evaporates, which as you saw in the BP thing in the Gulf of Mexico where the huge amount of oil escaped, but it's light crude, most of it actually just evaporates. This is what happened to that. So it changes completely the solution into the problem in terms of if there is a problem. But most importantly, now you're able to create jobs in BC. You're able to create help the local economy, and it changes the equation totally. Now you're able to do the right thing for the local economy, create jobs and services in the local economy. Now the key to that is the buy-in from the social community, from the First Nations, from the environmental groups. So how do you do that? So why is this a green refinery? So the first part of it, about 40% of the reduction in gas emission comes from the fact that we're firing the refinery with gas, natural gas, which is something very abundant in that part of BC. Just by doing that, we're able to capture about 40%, reduce about 40% of the gas emissions. Then the rest of it is you're able to capture most of the gas that's emitted, and you're able to recycle it, and we can get into a lot of questions into how we do that under NDAs, of course. But this is the key point here is compared to a normal refinery, which is at, if let's say it issues an index of 100, this will issue 7% of the gas emissions of a normal refinery, 7 compared to a normal refinery. Not only is this key to what we're doing in BC, this becomes the blueprint for every refinery going forward. There are 850 refineries in the world. They represent the second highest source of gas emissions on the face of the planet, refineries. Able to do this changes forever the face of refining around the world. So the value of this project goes well beyond just what we're doing in BC. The second good news is we actually did a lot of polling, and this is before describing what we're doing and who we are, and this is a green refinery, asking to people in BC, do you support a refinery in BC? It will create jobs, value-added services at home, and the response was yes. BC is open for business. Even the Green MLP from BC is in favor of a refinery because the alternative is to ship crude, which nobody wants. So we have support from the community in general, but the key thing is we meet the 5 conditions set out by Premier Christy Clark. These are the 5 conditions that she set out before she got elected in terms of what has to be done for a project to be supported by BC. We meet all 5 conditions, and in bold, the last 3, a refinery is the only solution to meet those conditions. A refinery is the only way to make sure that BC receives a fair share of the fiscal and economic benefit from a project like this. We meet all the legal requirements from Aboriginal entitlement, so we'll talk about that in a second. And obviously, by shipping refined product versus crude, we reduce dramatically the impact of a spill. The last piece of the puzzle is the First Nations. So we set out a year and a half ago, even before we officially formed the company, to engage with consultation with First Nations. As you can see from the team we've assembled, this was our first hire after we created the company with Jeffrey Koppinus. Jeffrey was the lead negotiator on the Kelowna Accord that was set up by Prime Minister Paul Martin a few years ago, one of the most recognized and trusted figure in First Nation affairs. He was the chief of staff for Sean Atleo, who was up to a few months ago, the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. So we were able to attract both Jeffrey Koppinus to our team, who was the lead negotiator with First Nations, and we were blessed to have people like Sean Atleo and Ovid McCready, who were both national chiefs to the First Nations. And obviously people like advisory board. I will fast forward because I'm running a bit out of time. But the key thing here is when you engage with First Nations, you have to engage them as an order of government. You have to come to them and start with not, hey, I'm going to do my project and here are some trinkets, but rather, are you interested in a long-term, multi-generational development project that will create education, teaching, jobs for your community for generations to come? Are you interested in such a project? And the ones who indicate they are interested, this is who you engage with and say, this is these are the parameters of the project. Which land is mutually convenient for both parties? It's a long-term process. You can't fast forward those things. They don't work on the same timeline that we normally work with in the boardroom. But so it takes time. We've been at this for 18 months, and now we're very lucky that we're getting very close on 2 sites to finalize discussions. So it's bearing fruits. The rest of the team, we've actually assembled a team of people on both sides of the aisle. People like Stockwell Day, people like Mark Marison, Jamie Carroll. You can see the profiles on our website. Truly a unique assembly of key leaders, both at the BC level, at the federal level, on both sides of the aisle, and on the First Nation levels. And guess what? This is an amazing business. Very rarely do you get a chance to actually do the right thing, solve so many problems, and make so much money doing so. But yet it is. So if you look at the current oil prices, so WTI at 45, sold in US and Canada at 36. The first tranche of the refinery is 200,000 barrels. At that tranche, this project will create $1.7 billion a year, every year, for 75 to 100 years. That's right. I'll give you an example. The refinery that's feeding BC today was built by Chevron in 1917. These things don't die. They go on forever. These things that's been refueling oil in BC for 100 years. In fact, the last refinery built in North America, in the US and Canada, was built about 40 years ago. Most refineries were built in the 1950s. This is why they produce so much gas emissions. This is why they're so unproductive, and some of them are going out of business, while the ones in the US are making huge profits because of the arbitrage with Canadian oil. So it's a very good business. And where we are today, so under full disclosure, we cannot talk about our financing because we're in the middle of it. We started last Monday our roadshow. We are right now in the phase where we're raising $25 million that will take us through the permitting process. That will take us about 2 years to finish the permitting, 2 to 3 years. And then we go into the actual construction of the project, which will be mainly debt. So this is where we are today. A great project. We're very excited. We've assembled a great team. And again, rarely do you have a chance to do something that feels so good and yet is such a good project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samer. Any questions from the audience? Come on, you guys must be a little bit curious.
What will the impact of the LNG that's going into the same area be on your operation?
Great question, thank you. So the key thing here, this is one of the reasons 50% roughly of the savings in gas emission is from firing the refinery with gas. So we actually are a consumer of gas coming from the area. So the sites we're looking at have gas pipelines going in. And so we don't compete with LNG per se, but we are a customer of the gas coming in from the area into our refinery. And then we actually emit some LNG as well. So we have a small production of LNG ourselves, but minuscule. Most of what we do is diesel and jet fuel and gas. So no direct impact. Some of the projects in BC and LNG are now going through finally. That's great. It helps the general area and the general economy we're in. So positive for us all around.
Do we have any other questions for Samer? I have one. Actually, we were talking a little bit ahead of lunch, and he made some interesting comments about Keystone, which, of course, is top of mind for many Canadians. Tell me, how will your project be affected by Keystone?
So,
approval or disapproval?
That's right. So again, another good question. So Keystone doesn't affect us one way or another. So most of roughly it's 800,000 barrels that are scheduled to go through Keystone XL. That was 6 years ago, and in the meantime, of course, it's found its way to the refinery. So most of that oil today is going down there anyway by train. So if XL is approved and by the time it's built, our expectation is, and the industry's expectation is, it's not going to really increase production from Alberta, but rather it's going to reduce the cost by shifting it back from rail to pipeline, rather than actually increase production. In any case, the other problem that Canada has is refining capacity in the U.S. is full. Refiners in the U.S. are barely able to keep with all the oil coming in from shale, and now with what's happening in Mexico over the next few years, the big issue is even if you're able to produce more oil, they're going to produce 3 to 4 million more barrels a day in the U.S. in the next 3-4 years. By the time they just expand the current capacity, then they're not able to handle the volume, let alone 3-4 years from now when all that comes online. So long answer, but the short of it is it doesn't really affect us at all.
Thank you. Any other questions for Samer?
Yeah, just curious, is the Nearnet zero emission technology, is that proven at production scale for refineries?
Great questions. Yes, but not this way. So this goes back to something I said earlier. There hasn't been a refinery built in the US, in Canada, for 40 years. Imagine if you had a 40-year-old car, what kind of technology that is, compared to a Tesla today. This is the difference we're talking about between a Tesla and a Oldsmobile built in 1960 or 1970. So what they have done for the last few years have done expansions on current refineries where they have deployed some of the gas, the emission capturing technology and the storage. That has been deployed. Firing with gas has been done. But to build a greenfield refinery from scratch with both ends, no, that hasn't been done. This will be the first. And that's the key point. So there's no technology risk here. It's not like, oh, you're going to spend $11 billion and it doesn't work. No, it will work. All the pieces already fit together and work, but no one has done it quite this way ever. And this is a key point. Once you're able to go back to the industry and say, hey, the second highest producing industry in the world in gas emissions, 7% of global gas carbon emission in the world is from refining. Once you're able to go back and reduce that by 90%, guess what? It puts a lot of pressure worldwide to do this. And that probably has more impact on global gas emissions, carbon emissions, than anything else being done in the world today. Our little project. Again, this is why this is a feel-good project. We really, when you come in our office at 5 o'clock in the morning, we're not there, but we're connected on Skype and we're talking to each other, and it's a vibrant place because rarely do you get so excited about something you do. Yes, sir.
With regards to the oil that's coming from the oil sand,
yes.
how would the carbon emissions affect how it's carbon competitive with other extraction that's maybe less carbon intensive at the extraction point? Does this bring us into equilibrium? Does it maybe change?
We're not in the producing phase. So our point is that oil is being produced today anyway, but certainly if you take it end to end from extraction to refining, I would venture, so I don't have this on a fact, so please don't quote me, but my guess is we'll actually way more than make up for it compared to traditional producing, way more. Incidentally, when you look at like electric cars, if that electric car is filled up from your house outlet and your electric producer is generating electricity from a coal-powered plant, that electric car is producing as much carbon emission as a regular petrol car. So you have to look at the entire value chain, and your point is very well taken. So we certainly reduce the impact of the oil sand emissions for sure. And we actually hope that what we're doing moves upstream to the production and start reducing that as well. But let's stick with the battle we have at hand right now. But certainly has a big impact, yes. Yes, sir.
One more question.
How do you see the government's development in D.C. resolving their economic sharing issues?
I certainly will not pretend to address that, to address that on their behalf. But I think what we've seen with Premier Prentice and the last few months, we've seen improvements in discussions. And the key thing here is a project like this addresses the 5 conditions. So by definition, our project hopefully will eliminate the core issue. But again, I don't want to address issues at the government level. But I think this will help the discussion greatly.
Any other questions for Samer? Oh, one more.
Would you be able to capture that discount that's going down to the U.S. into your refinery in Canada?
We hope so. The economics of our business are not contingent on their discount, but it is here to stay for a while. So as long as it stays, it simply makes our economics so much better. So the economics I mentioned before, 1.7 billion, that includes some of that. But even if that goes away, it's still a very profitable business. But unfortunately, we don't see that discount going away. Because 200,000 barrels a day is a very small quantity to really skip to change the scales right now. But we do hope to go to 1 million barrels. If everything goes well, then based on the demand on the other side of the Pacific, then if we get to 4 million barrels, then that will certainly start shifting that, reducing the margin for sure. the arbitrage.
A question here? Yeah.
This facility costs in the hundreds of millions to build and can produce value in billions. How come no one else has done it in 40 years?
I wish I had the answer to that. It costs 11 billion, so this is not for the faint of heart. Okay, this is not. This is something that it's taken us decades of experience to get us to actually take on something like this. But we will pay back the 11 billion in less than 10 years. This is a hugely profitable business. And it solves a fundamental problem, one that's glaring, one that's it's not like we uncovered something nobody else sees. Everybody's been talking about this forever. These profit margins from the US, everybody knows about them. The disparity between WCS and WTI, it's there. This is public data. I wish we could say we're such amazing visionaries that we found something nobody else before us found. Everybody sees the problem, but we decided to do something about it. Why has no one else done something about it before? I don't know. It's a good question. People get scared sometimes. And you know what? Something about us, we don't get scared. We don't worry about failure because we actually believe that this is how you learn. And before you get to a point where you can do something like this, you have to do a lot of mistakes before you get here. One mistake, I didn't get off the plane 30 years ago in Gander, but since then I've done a few, but this is where we are today.
Any other questions? One at the back of the room.
About the expansion of the market, do you have you are looking only for Asia. About Latin America, example Brazil, do you have any view or something about expansion of another market only in Asia?
You mean to sell the end product into Brazil?
Yeah, or in South America?
No, we don't see Brazil. We don't see Brazil or Latin America as a natural market for us. Because one of the key points of where we are is this is, again, one of the closest geographic points on the planet to Asia. 10 days to Tokyo, 13 to Shanghai. Once you go from Prince Rupert down to Brazil, it's a long way to go. So we lose the entire value advantage from a shipping perspective. But another very interesting market for us could be the U.S. But that's not a part of our business plan. Our business plan is focused on Asia, but we're already seeing a lot of interest actually to shipping some of the product down to the U.S. So that could happen, especially as the U.S. is getting into a shortage of refining. So the interesting thing what's happening in the U.S. dynamics is now they're increasing their production dramatically. Refining is not able to keep up with it, and the type of crude that they're issuing from the U.S. is light crude. We do heavy crude from Alberta, so I won't get into the impact of that here, but there is a mismatch between what's being produced and the demand. So there's potentially a big demand in the U.S., but that would be the icing on the cake. That would be just even better for our margins if it happens. But no, Brazil or Mexico, what's happening now with the changes in the law last year, that's good for Mexico, and I think that will equilibrate the supply and demand of refined product in Mexico. Let's see what happens with Venezuela. That's a very big question, what happens there for the next few years. And Brazil, I think, is too far away. But I might be wrong.
There's a question in the far corner.
Thanks. Is there a fatal flaw or a problem with actually just building a refinery at the source in Alberta?
Great question. So we've actually did a lot of data on that. And what we found, this is based on evidence that we found on the ground, is if you build the same refinery, it will cost us $11 billion in BC. It will cost probably $15 to $16 billion and add another year or two of construction to build it in Alberta. And the reason for that is threefold. A, there's a huge labor shortage in Alberta. So you won't even get the labor if you want it. And this is one of the reasons why most of the upgrading projects that happen in Alberta for the last few years have gone into over budgeting and run out of, they've run 2-3 years over their construction timeline. So building in Alberta, A, is going to increase, you don't have the labor to build it. Second, the key thing what we're doing here is we're actually building the refinery in huge modules. Imagine, if you will, in a very big Lego set. You're building it in Asia. We're in discussion with different manufacturers today. And then you take it by boat to shore, and you take it right off the boat and you barge it up if you have to a few kilometers, and you assemble it. That is how you save money on CapEx, and this is what happened in Alberta. To do the same project in Alberta, you have to take it probably into the US, take it through roads where these things don't fit, so that reduces the volume of your pieces. Take it through Indiana, take it up through Alberta. By the time you do that, you added 2-3 years of time, and you reduced your economies of scale because your modules are smaller. It's been proven, and it's not the optimal way to do it all around. Besides, this is an export facility. So when you do a refinery, you're close to the source or to the market. We're close to the market. 10 days by boat to Tokyo, that's considered very close. So this is an export refinery built basically on water, so you can save huge amount on CapEx and on deployment cost. This is why we won't do it in Alberta.
Question back there. You're making Taylor work.
Okay, because I'm from China, you just mentioned Shanghai, so I have a question that is, oil is controlled by the state-owned company in China. So will the entry to Chinese market reduce the oil price?
Will the entry to Chinese market reduce the oil price in China?
Yeah. Is it possible?
No. The volume we're talking about here is a drop in the bucket for the Chinese market. I don't know the number. Maybe Bob, you know how much the daily refining in China?
Is 2 million barrels per day of refined product, and so we're only 10% of the refined.
So no, we're too small to change the dynamics in China. So I wish we were. Hopefully one day. That's something to aspire to, but not today. We're too small.
Last call. Any other questions?
I've got a question.
One from head table.
Is that allowed?
I don't know.
We'll check the rules, that cheating?
I'm going to permit it. Go ahead.
What's the most interesting thing that you've discovered about Canada since your time here, besides your wonderful friend?
Oh, so he's cheating now. He's asking me what's the best thing I found about Canada in my time here. So again, we've been colleagues for 14 years. So one of the things I've been trying to beat out of him for 14 years, being a lawyer and becoming more a businessman. I'm almost there. And one of the things he keeps correcting me on is I keep saying I versus we. So he keeps telling me, you cannot say I in Canada. It's a we society. So eventually in a few years I'll get there. I'm working on it. But it's a very different, it's shocking. I'm a U.S. citizen. I've been working in the U.S. for 20 years, 30 years. God, I've just aged myself. In any case, it's really surprising, and you guys know this. It's just surprising to me that when you go over the 49th parallel, get into Canada, the business ethics and how things are done changes so dramatically, and this was surprising to me. So it's very exciting to be here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite Mr. Alfred Apps to join me at the podium and to thank our speaker.
The Empire Club's been around for a long time, and it's kind of a precious little institution. I can say that because I'm a past president.
Your family.
But they actually call these thank yous the appreciation. I think it's interesting just looking at the last couple of weeks and watching the State of the Union address and the robust recovery of the American economy and the panic that's descended on Canadian markets because of the crisis in oil markets, the Bank of Canada, etc. And it seems to me that the appreciation that's appropriate is an appreciation for another great idea that takes Canada from what we've so often been and described ourselves as hewers of wood, drawers of water, more lately, chippers of mineral and stone and pumpers of crude or sifters of crude, I guess is what we are in the oil sands. And to come up with a big idea that's at one level so self-evidently exciting, and at another level, once you dig deep and do the diligence and you understand that refining crude has maintained its margins even when the prices have fluctuated wildly. So I think The appreciation I want to make is the appreciation to you for being here today in a town that's anything but an oil and gas town to come and hear about this. The appreciation to the team for the vision. You said earlier, it's an obvious idea, but I think the vision is more about the how you're doing this relative to First Nations communities and environmental issues, Green Party, etc. I think the how is where you're showing some real leadership. And I think the appreciation of all of us, that whether it's, this or some other big idea, these are the things that are ultimately transformative and good for our quality of life and good for the country. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alfred. I'd like to extend a few thank yous as well. I'd like to thank our very generous sponsors, Wildeboer Delis for sponsoring our event today. Thank you. Enwave Energy Corporation for sponsoring our VIP reception. Braxted Group Inc. for sponsoring our student table this afternoon. I'd also like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor. This meeting will be broadcast on Rogers TV, and you can follow us on Twitter at empire_club, and visit us online at www.empireclub.org. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you joining us today. Please come again soon. There's a brochure on all of your tables describing some of the exciting upcoming events. And we look forward to seeing you again. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.